Hello and welcome to my final presentation on Black Christianity and the Making of America, Historiography for Histories 51602. The origins of Black Christianity. In my historiography, 4 out of the 10 authors included in my final bibliography all advocated for more scholarly research of Portuguese interactions in Africa in order to better understand the origins of a mixing of traditions. Based on this research, greater studies of Catholicism in West Africa are necessary. Additional research on the transatlantic slave trade should be analyzed with a greater focus on religious practice and better inclusion of the broader Atlantic world. Many of the authors were agreed with each other in the idea that if you want to find the origins of early Black Christianity, you have to go back to the first interactions between West Africa and those European nations that were practicing, mostly at this point, a form of Roman Catholicism. That was the Portuguese and the Spanish. So one of the ideas that many of these authors wanted to stress is that there were Black Christians in Africa before the discovery of the New World, before 1492. And so for many of them, as the transatlantic slave trade picked up in terms of frequency, in terms of the number of people being um, forcibly removed into slavery, that many of those Africans were Christian and had been Christian their entire lives and didn't know any other type of religion. Some of the major works that are under consideration in my bibliography, in my historiography, was Slave Religion, the Invisible Institution in the Antebellum South, Through the Storm, Through the Night, A History of African American Christianity, and Down in the Valley, An Introduction to African American Religious History. The authors here, Raveseau, Harvey, and Bailey, were all referenced hundreds of times by many of the other authors in this field of study. And Raveseau is one of the earliest scholars to be writing on this. This book was published in the late 1970s, but the edition that most people are familiar with is from 1980. Some of the other major works that I considered were The Black Church, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song by Henry Louis Gates Jr., who I know is more recognized maybe for his popular histories, his PBS broadcast series, historical documentaries. However, Louis Gates has been continuously publishing some of his works as he continues to serve as professor at Yale, I believe. And this is one of his most recent publications, which, as the title implies, focuses strictly on the Black Church, but his first 2 chapters of the book were all about tracing some of those early African practices and traditions to help better understand what the Black Church looked like in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries as he goes on to study. The First Prejudice, Religious Tolerance and Intolerance in Early America, which was edited by Chris Benecke, who's an author that we read in this course earlier. We read one of his own monographs. In this case, we were looking at individual chapters out of this book to again help us understand some of the first interactions of Black Christians here in the colonial America. And then to the right, we have Anthology of African Christianity, which again is another anthology, another book I've selected a few chapters out of to again focus on those early Black Christians and some of those African traditions they were mixing, bringing with them, which were then reconstituted after the horrors of the Middle Passage and the transatlantic slave trade into something far different than what was seen in Africa and something that did not exist yet in the American colonies, especially as most of the North American colonies would be Protestant as opposed to Catholic like the rest of the Atlantic world. Some of the conclusions of my research, as you can see over here, there's a visual to the right showing, again, something that reminds me of Catherine Jen Lum's book, Heathen, and some of the conclusions that she found in terms of how religion is used to identify the other were clear in this, but specific conclusions about early Black Christianity and its impact on American history is that it's definitely influenced by traditions brought with or brought to this country by enslaved people. And again, we must remember that a lot of the Africans, generally from West Africa, that were brought to the United States, if they were Christian, these forms of Christianity differed uh, widely between geographic areas. And since the transatlantic slave trade over the course of 200, 300, 400 years migrated to different parts of Africa, many of these forms of Christianity were influenced by multiple types of traditional African practices, faiths, beliefs, etc. And so you truly get a blending of different faiths and different ideas that were then brought here to the U.S. Christianity in Africa began with Portuguese colonization and exploration. Again, the idea, if you want to understand Black Christianity and American Christianity in general, you have to go far back, even before the discovery of the New World by Columbus. Incorporating religious study into cultural histories of the United States will bring greater understanding to American history. One thing that we've seen advocated throughout the course of this semester is that religion should be taken more seriously and that religious studies should be incorporated in different types of histories so that we can bring greater illumination to the American story. And finally, links between early Black Christians and evangelical revivals in the 18th century is a promising new area of religious scholarship. Many of the authors kind of flirted with the idea of tackling this directly, but there was, in most cases, only indirect links between the two. But there is, in my opinion, some really interesting scholarship that could be written and more research done on the topic of how much of an influence did early Black Christians have on these revivals, on evangelicalism, especially in the early 18th century as it was developed in the American colonies. I think there would be some surprising finds if scholars were to pursue this field more. Thank you for your attention.